Hello, everyone. What's Next is a series that gives Western's GPCW graduates insights in the post MA MFA life through the lens of their fellow alumni. My name is Dan Manzanares. I'm the GPCW's Alumni Coordinator, and I graduated in 2020 with an MFA in genre fiction. Thank you, Mark, for joining us on episode 4 of What's Next. Mark Leslie Lefebvre graduated in 2024 with his MA in publishing. Our theme for episode 4 is the writer's calendar and budget. Okay, so to start off, Mark, I'd love for you to tell the Frightmare in the Falls story you told
Yeah.
me when we spoke a few days ago, a sort of by the numbers budgetary breakdown of the event, starting with expenses and ending with your return, the profit that you made.
Yeah, so this is an event in Niagara Falls, Ontario, Canada. I'm Canadian. And because I write true ghost stories and horror and urban fantasy and a lot of the darker literature, like this is perfect for me and my Mark Leslie brand. So it's about $600 for the table. Then I had the hotel room for 2 nights. It was one of the cheaper hotels right beside the venue, which meant I could just walk over after I set up across this massive field. And I had to get help for the Saturday, so I could at least, get a bathroom break and, a biological break and stuff like that. Oftentimes, when you're by yourself, you'll get your neighbor to help you out. But this one was a longer stretch, so I actually paid someone to come in for the day and help me with that. And then of course food, right? So I had accommodations. I mean, that doesn't even count gas. And then I was there at the table for several days. So the calculations of this was this probably cost me about $1,500 in total to be there for the Friday, the Saturday, and then the half day on Sunday for this event, which is a significant expense, not to mention the expense of what I had to pay for my stock because I'm there with my author table. So there's the stock, then, the pre-existing expenses would be the stock because that's just part of my operations. Then also the banners and the tablecloth and the shelving and all the stuff that I would have paid for. So it really costs more, but I kind of amortize that over time. But pretty expensive outlay of cash there.
And also not to mention your time, right? So like were you doing like
I was making a penny an hour. I was paying myself a penny. Yeah, that's the thing is I didn't even calculate what I normally earn in an hour as an industry consultant. So yeah,
yeah.
I couldn't afford myself at that point.
Right. Okay, so then so those are the expenses.
Yeah,
Can you talk about how this like when you told me this story before, it was all about how important it is for this to
yeah,
know the budget, to have the budget,
right,
kind of at least in your mind, if not like, written down somewhere and maybe a
right.
spreadsheet, I don't know. But then
So
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, yeah, no, I mean, th this is an important thing. So that was the just the expense alone. Now I did make close to $2,000. But once I backed out my expenses, I realized, that this doesn't pay me per hour or any of that stuff. I had $200 extra in my pocket at the end of it. And I had this discussion with my wife, over dinner. She's like, well, you earn $2,000, you spend about, 15, 1,600, whatever it is. At the end of the day, when she calculated all those expenses, it was about $200 ahead.
Mhm.
And she said, well, that was a heck of a lot of work, considering your time and everything, to be $200 ahead. You make $200 in an hour when you're consulting. You know what I mean? Like that was not a good waste of your time. And that's when I went, aha, we have a secret here, and this is about long-term author success, is that okay, all of this time, all of this effort, all of this work resulted in only $200 extra in my pocket. At least it wasn't negative. But the way I look at these shows is even if I just break even or I'm a little bit under, they're a huge marketing effort because there were hundreds of people who walked away with signed copies of my books that they bought, that they did not know who I was. I also had some fans who had actually purchased my books in a hardcover online, who knows when, years, months, weeks earlier, showed up to get me to sign them. I had one gentleman dressed in a werewolf costume wanted to come and get pictures with me in my books and stuff like that because my Canadian werewolf series. And so I look at that as a significant marketing expense because a lot of authors will do marketing expenses on Facebook ads and Amazon ads and BookBub ads or whatever. They can be spending hundreds of dollars in a month, if not more. But the minute they stop feeding that slot machine, the book disappears. Now, these books that I signed are physical books that are in people's hands. That marketing is ongoing because not only did I have that experience of interacting with some readers, getting new people to check out, maybe they only bought book one in a series. Maybe that meant, and I can't measure this, maybe they've now bought books two and three online, but I have no idea it was the same person I talked to 2 years ago. um, that is a marketing expense, a long-term marketing expense. They have that physical book that they can say, "Oh, I met this guy, I met the guy who wrote this series, and here's a picture of me, and we're in his booth, and he had a skeleton with him, and all those things." So I've created an experience for a reader, not just an ad that pops up when they're looking at books on Amazon.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think this is a huge point because, and we're going to talk about this a little later, but like,
Yeah,
the importance of seeing, the result of the event in terms of money, just being a few $100 ahead at the end versus seeing it as long-term branding.
yeah.
And so the time that you invested there now kind of becomes embodied, I would say, the time and what you said, the experience in these fans, these readers.
Yeah.
And so like, the money is important, but the long-term branding might be, would you agree, much more important?
Oh, yeah, for me, that's way more important. I don't want to just sell a book. I want to give people an experience that they enjoy, that they reflect on, that they talk about, that they become marketing people for me. As if it was a good experience. I mean, if their interactions with me were negative, then that's negative author branding. But ideally, they had a good experience and they remember that. And again, there are some shows that I've gone to repeatedly where somebody comes back and says, "Oh, I got one of your books last time. What do you have that's new?" And actually, one of the most recent shows I did was so funny because this one fan, she came up and she's like, "Hey, what do you have that's new?" I'm like, "Well, since I saw you 6 months ago, I don't have anything new, unfortunately. You got everything. Like you have everything. You have the full collection." But you have that sort of a wonderful experience, and that's where I'm like, "Oh, gee, what do I have for my diehard fans? What's new that I could give them?"
Yeah.
Guess all I have is an experience that I can give them, right? The interaction.
Yeah. So I love this story, the Frightmare and the Falls story. So to backtrack a little, this story came up while we were talking about your writer's calendar a few days
Yeah.
ago, and how much you say yes to not only in-person events but virtual writerly commitments, things like podcasts and one-on-one coaching sessions. What's your criteria for saying yes to opportunities for you as an author and yes to the community? How does
Yeah.
saying yes affect your calendar?
So the saying yes for the Mark Leslie brand or the Mark Leslie Lefebvre brand is important because I think it's important to be invited to the next party, to be relevant. I was earlier today, I was talking to a class at Sheridan College that was sort of as a industry professional and talking about also my experience as an author. Um, I think there's one thing. So I look at what does this do to my brand? Does it enhance my brand, my reach and stuff like that? And it's really difficult to measure. You don't know when you're saying yes what the reach is going to be or who you're going to reach.
Yeah.
I tend to default to saying yes more often than not, unless I can't, right? There was an event I would have wanted to do this past Saturday, but my wife wanted to do a garage sale and making her happy is way more important than right than showing my face at a community author event and stuff like that. But the other element that I think is so important, and this has been important to me, I've had so many mentors over the years who've taken time to help and share and learn. Kevin Anderson being one of them, one of the instructors at WCU, who always takes the time to help other writers. I am also a judge of Writers of the Future now, and so that part of that mandate and part of the reason that what they look for in judges is people who are willing to give, pay it forward and give to the community. And so I will say yes if I know it's going to be of benefit to other writers or other people who want to learn more about the industry. And I will be overly generous with those yeses. Whereas when it comes to my personal benefit yeses, I tend to be a little bit more reserved, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because the personal benefit yeses are more of a, is this going to be a useful thing? And I tend to default to yes anyways, probably way too much. But every time I say yes, it means I take away my other time to do things like have that next book ready for the diehard fans.
Mhm. Yeah, and could you give me a little nitty-gritty into the count, like when yes is happening a lot, what happens to like, the mechanical calendar that you interact
Yeah,
with? Like
that is,
do things get a little nuts?
they do. They do. I was actually just looking at booking something that's coming up in September, and that's I'm doing something on behalf of Draft to Digital, going to Novelist Inc. in St. Pete, Florida, which, oh darn, it's such a horrible place to go in the fall. Like, go to a nice tropical place where you're on the beach with a bunch of other writers and industry professionals. No, but then having to like do I was talking to my colleague, do we stay an extra day or two so we can actually just relax and enjoy ourselves? I'm like, no, I got to get home because 3 days later, I'm flying out to Salt Lake City Fan Expo to be there on panels with the writers of the future. And so sometimes you're like, yay, I'm in Florida for work, which is great. I love it. But also, oh, yay, I need to be somewhere else soon. So sometimes when you're looking at the calendar, even the logistics can be challenging. So sometimes I've taken trips where I was like, well, I don't have time to go home, especially coming back to Canada. So I'll stay an extra day in the States so that I can then, fly in a day early for the next conference and maybe get some of that work done that I need to get done in my hotel room. I've done that a few times where it's difficult to negotiate, saying, "Oh, by the way, hon, these 3 weeks out of this month, I'm not going to be here." I just recently I did a talk in New Brunswick in Canada's Atlantic coast. And I'd never been to New Brunswick before. I've only ever flown into Halifax, Nova Scotia. And so I thought, oh, I could drive out to New Brunswick. It's only 14 hours. Maybe make a road trip, and my best friend joined me. So we turned this, 2 days where I was at this conference speaking New Brunswick Federation or Writers Conference, turned it into a 12-day road trip and to see to actually get some sightseeing in and stuff like that. But of course, I was working every morning from the hotel room because I work for myself as a writer and also as a consultant. So it's not like I can ever really turn it off.
Yeah. Well, and I mean because sometimes experiences should be for you too, for the writer, I should say, and
Yeah,
making something like it's just a really cool thing, the traveling, for the work that we want to connect with readers in the community, and also to, have a little joy for
yeah,
our own experience and you
yeah.
know, so I think we need both is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, and the challenge I have is I love what I do. I love writing and I love interacting with readers, but I also love helping other writers. So all of this work travel never really feels like work, which
Mm.
is can be a bit of a trap.
Yeah. So speaking of getting back to the community, I think um, being available to the community, serving their needs, you mentioned this, is a long-term investment
Yeah,
in itself, where everyone kind of ends up winning. It just takes a while, and like you said,
yeah,
can be difficult to measure. When you look at your calendar, kind of like macro, January to December, when you see yourself investing in the community, and like where and when do you see yourself investing in a community, like specific times?
yeah,
And how do you know when you're making that investment that you're making an impact? What are the
yeah.
markers you see?
Well, there are several annual conferences that are really important for me, not just to be part of the community where I can grow and learn as a person and an industry insider, but I can also curate and maintain important friendships.
Hmm.
The most significant one every year for me is always in February at Superstars Writing Seminars in Colorado Springs. That's a must go to ever since. There's a similar one in the Mountain Time Zone up in Calgary, north of there, that takes place in August when words collide. And that's another one that I've been going to for almost as many years as Superstars. And so those are sort of like I've got the one in February, that one in the summer, and then I'll spotlight other ones. Like Novelists Inc. in September is also another one. Almost the entire month of October is usually reserved for Mark Leslie, the spooky horror guy.
Hmm.
I'm in demand for a lot of things this year. My traditionally published book, Haunted Hamilton, it was 13 years old this year, was selected for the One Book, One Community for Haldeman,
Cool.
and which is kind of like it's getting a resurrection, right? It's haunting the world again because 13 years later they picked it where everyone in this community near Niagara Falls, between Niagara and Hamilton, that's the Haldeman region of southern Ontario. They're going to be reading the book, and so I'm doing community events. Now that ties in beautifully with a book I've signed with a different publisher on Ghosts of the Great Lakes, and that means, oh, while I'm going and promoting this book in this community, I'm going to be going through communities that are on the Great Lakes so I can do research for the next book I have to write. So doubling down can be an important aspect, but honestly, it's the ultimately it's the friendships and networking sounds like a dirty word, but the networking, I think a lot of my successes in this industry over the years have had to do with connecting with people. Later today, I'm just hanging out with my cohort of graduates. I guess because Thursday for Kevin's class, I was already committed to something else, and so were some other people. I said, well, why don't we just have a hangout for ourselves as well, and anyone else who wants to join can join us, because that community is such an integral part of this industry. And I think one of the most important things that you can cultivate are those friendships and those relationships. And that's the main reason why there's certain ones I have to go to, because half of it's the content and the other half is just connecting with the people that you want to stay connected with.
Yeah. Well said. Okay, so to switch a little bit to the topic of money,
Yeah.
we all need money, enough money
Yeah.
for sustainable to year living. Yet
Yeah.
being a creative person is a little different. Writing stories and trying to sell them to a market can be a little strange feeling.
Yeah. Hmm.
When we were talking before, you said to me, if the goal is to make money, I'd never be happy. Can you unpack what you meant a little and talk
Yeah.
about, the goals that you have as a writer and author that make you the most happy?
Yeah, it's so funny because sometimes I have these ideas. Oh, this book is fits the market. It's going to sell really, really well. When I look at some of my books that are with Dundurn, a publisher from Toronto, Canada, I would have thought that Macabre Montreal, which Montreal is the second biggest population in all of Canada, I would have thought that that would be my best-selling book because it's the biggest population. No, Haunted Hamilton outsells that. Creepy Capital, Ottawa, outsells that. Tomes of Terror, the bookstores and libraries outsells it. Sudbury, spooky Sudbury, only 90,000 people live in that city, outsells that continually year after year.
Interesting.
When I've focused on my passion and love for a project over thinking about this is a market that's going to sell,
Mm.
that's worked for me time and time again. The most recent example I think is a pretty decent one is a few years ago. I'm a huge fan. I grew up in the 80s, so huge fan of 80s nostalgia and movies and stuff like that. One of my movies that I've watched hundreds of times since the 80s was Planes, Trains, and Automobiles with John Candy and Steve Martin. And there's a book that John Candy's character is reading when they first meet at LaGuardia Airport. It is meant to be a joke. He's reading a pornographic novel. There's actually in the script that actually talks about that, and he explains why he's reading pornography because he's read everything else. He's finally working his way because he travels all the time. Anyways, the book was called The Canadian Mounted. Ha ha, John Candy, Canadian actor. It's just a prop joke, right? Now, I saw the same book title in Deadpool, and I went, oh, is this one of those fake like phone numbers, 555 exchange that they use in Hollywood and television. Right? You use a 555 number, whatever, right? So you don't give someone's real number. I thought this was a prop book, or like the Wilhelm scream, which is that scream that they'll put that was from an old classic war movie that they just use, and audio designers or whatever use them in films as a nod. And I thought that's what this was. I thought it was only ever a prop book. I didn't realize until I started researching that it was a real book. Because I thought, I'm going to publish a book called The Canadian Mounted with a similar cover, and it'll be a trivia book about the movie, and I'll talk about this. But then somebody had actually saw that it was up for pre-order, reached out to me and said, no, it was a real book. It was published in the 80s. It was a real porn novel. I got a hold of a replica copy of it. I ended up getting access to the art because it was never registered for copyright, and the company that published it went bankrupt. That was the last book they ever published. And so I ended up using that. And I wrote this book with love and passion. That was my dedication because I thought maybe there would be 15, maybe as many as 30 other people in the world who were as nerdy as I was and loved this movie as much as I did. That has been, might actually be my, well, not quite, but close to my top selling book
Oh,
that I've
wow.
ever published because apparently when people love it, they really love it and they want it. And again, I've maybe only sold a couple hundred copies in ebook, but I've sold thousands and thousands of copies of this as print because people
Uh,
want to get the book. They want to sit there, they want to prop, they want to peek over the book, like take pictures of themselves at the airport or wherever it is, reading the Canadian Mounted because they think it's funny. It's a nod to John Candy and
yeah.
obviously what Ryan Reynolds used did a similar thing in Deadpool as a nod to him. So I just when I think about that book, I've written other books. I've done Die Hard. I love Die Hard. I did a book of trivia about Die Hard, book of trivia about Christmas Vacation. They've done well, but I was as I was writing them, it was the passion, but I'm like, oh, this is market is good. I'm going to keep going, and it didn't work as well. And it reminded me when I focus on the passion, when I focus on writing the thing that resonates the most with me internally, and that's the driving force, that seems to work better because even if it doesn't sell, I still win. I win by creating the art. I win by creating the process. So yeah, okay, Die Hard and the and Merry Christmas, the crapper was full. You know, it didn't sell nearly as well as they still sold really well. I'm just comparing them to it. But writing the books was satisfying. The research was so much fun. I get to sit and watch one of my favorite movies and then pause and make notes and look up interviews with the actors and pull details and compile them. I mean, I'm working on a Cheers, Cheers being one of my favorite TV shows of all time. I've just spent the last 6 months rewatching the entire series and making notes, like stopping, every day at lunch while I'm having lunch because I work from home. I'll watch an episode or two of Cheers, so I give myself a bit of a break. But I'm also stopping, pausing, going, "Oh, there's an episode where you see Vera's hands," like stuff like that, like little things that are going to end up in the book. Will this book sell? I don't care. Will I have fun writing it? Darn right I will.
Yeah. That's awesome. Um, so you also, when we were talking about, going back to, you already talked a little bit about the New Brunswick story.
Yeah,
Can you go a little bit into that? Because the idea of, if I only focused on money, I'd never be happy. And
yeah,
yet there's this New Brunswick road trip that ended up developing out of,
yeah,
a job, a gig.
yeah,
Can you talk a little, because I think there's the two great resources, right, that we're talking about, our time,
yeah.
and money, and the time spent in New Brunswick probably fed something, that
Yeah.
maybe money would not be able to do for you.
Yeah, now I got paid an honorarium, right? For that, they paid for my hotel and then gas, and we took my buddy's Tesla, so the gas expenses were really cheap. So, way less expensive than a gas car would have been to get out. It was like $75 to get there or something like that, right? Instead of $300 in gas. But anyways, um, when I go to do an event like that, yes, there's often an honorarium where they're going to pay me or they're going to cover it. But I also look at it from this perspective. When they invited me, I was like, "Oh, I've never been to Fredericton. I've never been to New Brunswick. Ooh, this is a great opportunity for me." Similarly, a few years ago, I've been called by the Victoria Writers Guild, and they asked if I could come and teach a half-day workshop on author branding. And they said, "Well, we'll give you this much of an honorarium," which is again not a lot of money. But we'll pay for your flight and we'll pay for your hotel. And I was like, oh my God, I've never been to Victoria. This is a free trip to Victoria. So it's not that I'm making big bucks going there, but I'm getting to have an experience. But also, just as important as going to a really cool place and seeing really cool things like Canada's East Coast or West Coast or whatever it is, it's the people I've met there. I've always connected with somebody and connected and stayed connected with writers that I've met at these conferences. And that's so, so critical. And that's the intrinsic value I get from it. So again, it's not going to pay the bills, but it's going to give me some. And again, what do we need as writers? Well, we need input for the things we create, whether it's nonfiction research that I'm doing or just characters. Like somebody that I met at a bar who's not even related to the writing conference might become, the elements that go into a character someday.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like the time and the money. This is what I'm hearing, like to sum up, it's like the
Yeah,
time and the money give you the opportunity for people, for readers, for
yeah,
relationships, for fans. So it's
yeah,
like the budget, the money, the calendar, we're opening up opportunities for more people in our
yeah.
lives.
And you never know. I mean, when I think about the opportunities I've had, I know, for example, my very first book that was published in 2004, and I think I only sold about 300 print copies of that book. And it was like, oh my God, it was only in 2014. So 10 years after the book had been published, I get a letter from McGraw-Hill Ryerson, which is an educational publisher here in Canada, with a photocopy of one of the stories. One of the 300 people who purchased the book got into the right hands of somebody who worked for this, and they wanted to reprint that story
Hmm.
in an educational resource that's been used in high schools in British Columbia to teach suspense. Like it's an example of a really short story, less than 1,000 words. And I've made so much money off of that story that initially I remember I could never sell because it was too short. It wouldn't fit in any market. So I just included it in this book. And lo and behold, the serendipity of that connection of somebody who picked up this book led to something later on. I've been at events where I remember a podcast I was on in 2006, somebody in 2016, again, roughly 10 years later, recognized my name and the title of the book I would been talking about writing 10 years ago. And she's like, "Oh my God, Mark Lasky, I remember you from this podcast." And so there's all of these moments of saying yes, and all of these moments when you look, if I just looked at it from a logistical operation, and I just looked at it from a, well, I'm worth this much per hour and this is not going to pay me back. You can't measure the connections that you can have with readers and with other writers and other industry people just by taking the time to go and do those things. And again, the other bonus you get is you get an experience, right? What are we here for? Experience, I think, maybe. I want to make the most out of it. The as Rush says in one of their songs, the point of the journey is not to arrive. The journey itself is the adventure.
Hmm. Awesome. All right, Mark, thank you so much for all your insights on our theme. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with your fellow alum?
All I'd have to say is, you know this already as an alum, you never stop learning. It doesn't stop once you graduate from WCU. We can always learn from one another, so we're paying attention with our eyes, our ears, our minds, and our hearts.
All right. Thanks again, Mark. And thanks everyone for watching episode 4 of What's Next.